Cold and dark, that's the Finnish winter. Having 4 seasons is nice and all, but let's be honest, 4-month winter is way too long, so once again it's time for me to head off for a mild adventure. But first, since this is the first episode of the series, let me give you a small presentation about my journey as a traveling man. I did my first solo trip to Leipzig, Germany for a gaming tournament in 2006, and the next year I did a 1-month interrail trip around Europe. I fell in love with the backpacking life, and ever since I have traveled on and off. Here are pictures from some of my favorite places I have visited over the years. My longest trip has been 7.5 months long, which I started by going to Beijing by land and finishing the trip coming back from Estonia by boat. Since I have dedicated a lot of time for traveling, I have never considered traveling as being on a holiday. Instead, I have taken it as a part of everyday life. Now let's take a look at some key numbers people have been curious about. I have spent a night in 56 different countries, mostly around Europe and Asia, and did day trips to smaller places like Luxembourg and Macau. So far I have been on 81 flights and on quite many bus and train rides. I wouldn't mind traveling more on boats and trains if they were as cheap as flying. Here is a short summary of my unfortunate events. Once I have been to a hospital, once I have been robbed, once that I know of have I been scammed, and twice I have been interrogated at a border, but never have I lost my passport or my will to travel. My absolute favorite way to spend a night abroad is staying in a hostel with other travelers, and so far it has been 600 nights and counting. In conclusion, I would say I have traveled more than most, but not as much as some. Now let's take a quick look on 3 simple steps to take before ending up in the destination. Step 1. Decisions. The first step is to decide what you want to do and where you want to do it. In my case for this time I wanted to go somewhere cheap and warm for the winter. Based on my previous experiences, I ended up deciding on Southeast Asia, which fits the criteria nicely. Step 2. Time and money. The 2 important components in charge of our decisions. The winter is long in Finland, so I needed a moderate amount of time, ending up staying abroad for 3 months. You also need to sleep, eat and drink, so you're going to need some money as well. Since people are usually curious about how I can afford traveling, here is a daily estimate of what I spent my money on. When it comes to food, it's easy to find good cheap food in Southeast Asia, and since I don't care too much about fancy food, eating in the local cheap restaurants is fine for me. As mentioned before, I spent most of my nights in hostels. The most expensive nights on this trip were 13 euros in Singapore, and the cheapest were around 4 euros in Kuala Lumpur. Exploring new places also meant that I have to move around quite a bit, staying in about 20 different places, spending about 450 euros on transportation. And finally, there's the entertainment. I went easy on the drinks in Malaysia and Indonesia, but tried my best to catch up in the Philippines. This is the part of the budget, which can be either 0% or 50% of your total spending. In general, I like to travel cheap, which means I need to find good deals and avoid most of the luxury. 3 months with this daily spending, plus the plane tickets to get there, totaled under 3,000 euros. Compared to an average rent of 700 in Helsinki, I would say I got my money's worth. Step 3. Pack your bags and go. And that should do it. Before going more into detail of this trip, I think it's a good idea to explain a little bit about what drives me into going abroad and what I'm looking forward to most while traveling. The number one is the people. I have always left for my journeys by myself, but never ended up spending time only by myself. Since I haven't had the luxury of having an old friend with me while traveling, I'm always up for meeting new nice people, which makes every day more unpredictable and exciting. Having to put yourself out there every day is a daring but rewarding experience. Hostels and international communities makes it easier to get together with other people and enjoy life. Being able to hang out with other travelers or learning from locals is a great way to spend your time, in my opinion. Then there are the cities and nature. I enjoy exploring huge cities and what they have to offer, and also the amazing natural environments which I haven't seen before. Wandering around the streets of Manhattan or a jungle in Borneo can be as exciting. Exploring the nearest beer store is usually the best though. If there is a possibility to do activities which I enjoy, I always try to take advantage of that. For example, playing games, visiting museums, or going to see shows. Not to forget drinking in a good company, which definitely classifies as an activity, an excellent activity.
Do you make vlogs?
No, fuck no.
Last but not least, sites, also known as tourist attractions, which has kind of a bad ring to it, but there are a huge amount of interesting places and events around the world which aren't popular by chance. I'm not interested in the most notorious overpriced tourist traps or tours, but as long as the attraction has some actual value, I'm all for it. Now that we have covered the basics, let's take a closer look on what I ended up doing during my winter escape. Let's start off with the place I landed into after a 20-hour, €160 flight through London, Singapore. I had actually visited the city 6 years ago and I had good memories about it, so it was exciting to come back and see what was up. The city has a totally different vibe compared to any other city in Southeast Asia, which can be a little bit disjointing. The first thing you notice is the high quality of infrastructure and general calm atmosphere, even though it's a major city. Also, the well-known cleanliness and strict rules of Singapore are certainly not a myth, maybe taken a little bit too far for my liking. Other major cities I visited in the area, like Malacca in Malaysia, Yogyakarta in Indonesia, or Cebu in the Philippines, have way much more in common with each other than with the shiny streets of Singapore. They can feel more crowded and dirtier, but nowhere near the madness, noise or pollution compared to big cities in India, for example. If one would travel to Southeast Asia, where it is generally plus 25 Celsius all year around, one might expect to stay away from the cities and head to the beaches and islands. I actually found the various cities to be interesting each in their own way, especially Jakarta, where I ended up staying with a local through couchsurfing in the suburbs of the massive city. I'll go more into details of couchsurfing in a later episode. In short, it provides a chance to actually see and live the life with the locals. I had never stayed in a suburb like that before and it kinda blew my mind. Here you can see me walking around those maze-like alleyways. Also thanks to my host, after a train ride and a bumpy winding road, we found ourselves at the village of the indigenous Badui people. This was something I wouldn't have done just by myself and probably couldn't have because of the language barrier. The small village had a developed part which was connected to the society and one part which was isolated from the society, and it was forbidden especially for white people to enter there. The scenery was marvelous to say the least. Speaking of beautiful scenery, Indonesia did not let me down. From vast rice fields to multiple volcanoes, all the way to beautiful beaches and amazing creatures of the sea. I traveled through the Java Island by train, which is a transport method I always try to support if possible. It's a more enjoyable experience than taking a plane or sitting in a bus. You can really enjoy the views and let your mind wander. My destination at the other end of Java was Mount Ijen, which was recommended to me by other travelers previously on this trip. The climb to the mountain started in pitch black after midnight. There were quite a few people equipped with flashlights slowly heading up towards the crater. The volcano is an active source of sulfur, which is being collected by miners and carried on their backs out of the crater. But why believe me? Let's listen to the guy who was there. Alright, here we are climbing the Mount Ijen. It's a volcano with sulfur there, and it's like 2 a.m. right now. There's maybe 100 people here walking the trail, and it's pretty dark. A lot of fun so far. After coming down to the crater in darkness, it was quite the realization when the sun finally came up and you could see that you were surrounded by massive mountain walls and a huge lake just right in front of you. I have to say it was one of the most memorable moments of the trip, along with this one right here, encountering a Komodo dragon at someone's backyard. Gladly I was told before that humans can outrun the dragons on flat ground. To my surprise, I ended up filming many various cool creatures throughout the trip, like this cute monkey hanging out with the tourists, or this beach deer chilling by the sea, or this city lizard eating trash in a gutter, which was sad but exciting to witness. Unfortunately, I didn't have the equipment to film underwater turtles or me going swimming with manta rays. You just have to believe me that it was amazing. However, what I was able to film were these orangutans in Borneo. They were roaming freely in a jungle outside of a rehabilitation center for orangutans. Let's have a look how it looks like outside of these dedicated areas for the apes. Alright, we're in Borneo in Sandakan at the monkey reserve. But actually on this side of the road there's the palm tree plantations which have taken over pretty much all of Borneo. And on the other side of the road is the reserve for the monkeys, which still has the natural habitats. You can truly see the size of the plantations from the sky. It's a trade-off between commerce and nature. It was also by the orangutans where I met not one or two, but 3 Finnish people.
Ja ne on hirveästi ainakaan tiputtua, että niinku, jotain niinku ideaa tossa.
Niin ja sit kun toi on niin tiheä toi metsä, että jos se puu nyt pikkaa tosta niin lähtee kallistua ja kaatua, niin sit vaan nappaa seuraavasta kiinni.
Seuraavasta se pääsee.
Sulla on 4 käpälää siinä, niin millä sä voit napata jollakin kiinni.
It's always fun to meet fellow countrymen out and about, considering most of the people in the world have never even met one in person. Since we are on the subject of my home country, let's see what kind of special activities you can do while abroad. So let's head back to Singapore for a moment, where I went to fulfill my civic duty of voting in the presidential elections. Who would have thought you could do such fun things abroad? And when it came to fun things, Singapore sure had a lot to offer of what I enjoyed. Let's start with the gaming cafes, where I played some and watched the national team's games. I was fortunate enough to be in town for the St. Patrick's Day, meeting up with few locals for quality outdoor drinking. Now for something completely different. A great way to spend my time is to play some cards. I took part in a tournament of a card game which is always quite nostalgic, as I first started playing the game back in the good old times of 1996. Of course, I finished with 3 wins and 0 losses. One last special thing I didn't expect to find in Singapore was a monthly disc golf event at a local park organized by an American expat. It was a great afternoon with a bunch of nice people enjoying the wonders of a plastic disc, only to be disrupted by the daily torrential rain. Okay, we need to see a replay of that beautiful shot. Pay close attention to the snap of the hair. I think it was my only successful drive of the round. Compared to an average beach destination, big cities can offer something different. Then again, if you end up at a beach which is above average, you will probably have a good time. It's possible to find beautiful secluded beaches and waterfalls in Southeast Asia if you just ask around. Getting around to them, however, is an adventure on its own. It usually involves renting a scooter and going through some sketchy roads, which can be both dangerous and fun at the same time. I definitely had my share of both on this trip. But it's totally worth the effort to reach these fantastic locations, even though you might get some bruises from having too much fun. Before wrapping up this first episode, let's take a look at the only thing I had already planned to do before heading off to this trip. An esports tournament, and to be more specific, a Dota 2 tournament held at the mountain resort complex near Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. As long as I can remember, computer games have been a big part of my life, and these days it's quite amazing that gaming tournaments are being organized all around the world for thousands of paying spectators. 16 teams participated in this tournament, fighting for a $300,000 prize pool in front of a sold-out crowd of 6,000 people. Unfortunately, my favorite team lost in the finals, but afterwards I managed to talk to some of the players in the after party, which was nice. All in all, I had a pretty good trip.
Has the pain ever been the only thing real? Have you ever upheld that grief only to feel? Well, I haven't, still I would do it all again. It's hard to balance between scars and death. I know when you go too far to get back again. I guess there's many ways to live on the edge. It all started to make some sense at last. You asked me would I do it differently, now that I know the end. But the real question seems to be